The pod's light turned golden, its engines roaring. Lyra's voice broke through the chaos. "Thank you, Dad." And then the warehouse exploded in a storm of light. The hunters disintegrated, their bodies torn apart by the surge. Jake felt the heat and the wind lift him off the ground. For a moment, he saw Lyra's pod shooting into the sky like a star. Then everything went silent, the world fading into light. Silence. That was the first thing Jake felt. No sound, no pain, just soft light wrapping around him like a warm blanket. He opened his eyes slowly, blinking at a sky filled with colors he had never seen before. Soft pink clouds floated in rivers of gold, and stars shimmered like living things. For a moment he thought he was dreaming, then he saw it. A silver-blue world hanging below him, glowing like a pearl in the dark. Earth peaceful and distant, Jake floated gently, surrounded by faint orbs of light drifting like fireflies. He tried to move, and the lights responded. Lifting him higher, he wasn't falling. He was being carried, Jake, a soft voice called. He turned and saw Lyra standing nearby, her silver hair flowing in an unseen wind. Her eyes glowed brighter than ever, and her smile was full of both joy and sorrow. "You made it," she said softly. Jake looked around, dazed. "Where are we?" he asked. Lyra raised her hand, pointing to the horizon where massive crystal towers floated among the clouds. "My home," she whispered. "You brought me home." Jake's breath caught as he took in the sight. Beings of light, tall and graceful, glided through the air, their voices like distant music. They watched Lyra with awe and love, and one of them approached. It was her mother, her face gentle. Her eyes glowing like stars, Lyra ran into her arms, her small figure glowing brighter as they touched. Jake smiled, his chest tightening with relief. He had done it. She was safe. Lyra's mother looked at Jake with gratitude. "Human," she said in a melodic tone. "You risked your life to protect what was lost." Jake rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "Yeah, well, she kind of grew on me," he said. Smiling faintly, her mother tilted her head, curious. "Your spirit carries courage and kindness, the rarest forms of power." Jake chuckled softly. "I just did what any dad would do." Lyra turned back toward him, holding the crumpled $5 bill in her tiny hand. She floated closer, her eyes shimmering. "I kept it," she said softly. "It reminds me of the first moment you said yes." Jake laughed quietly. "That was one strange job offer," he said. Lyra smiled sadly. "You were the first person who didn't run away from me." For a while, they stood together watching the glowing sky, but then the light around Jake began to fade. He looked down and saw his hands turning transparent. Lyra gasped. "No, Jake, you can't go yet." Jake gave her a gentle smile. "Looks like I don't belong here, kiddo." Tears welled in her eyes. "But you're my dad." Jake knelt and placed his hand over hers, even as his fingers began to fade. "And you'll always be my little girl," he whispered. Lyra hugged him tightly, her arms passing through him like mist. "Will I ever see you again?" she asked, voice breaking. Jake looked up at the endless sky, then back at her. "If you ever look at the stars and hear a laugh in the wind," he said softly, "that'll be me watching over you." Lyra nodded, tears sparkling like tiny stars. Her mother stepped forward, touching Lyra's shoulder gently. "It's time," she said. "His place is not here." The air shimmered and a soft beam of light surrounded Jake. He felt himself rising, weightless, peaceful. Lyra reached out, shouting, "Goodbye, Dad!" Jake smiled as the light wrapped around him completely. "Goodbye, Lyra," he whispered. "Keep shining." Then everything went white. When Jake opened his eyes again, he was lying on a hill just outside the city. The rain had stopped, and the morning sun painted the clouds gold. Birds sang in the distance, and the world felt strangely calm. He sat up slowly, his clothes still torn, his hands still trembling. For a moment, he wondered if it had all been a dream. But then he felt something in his pocket. He reached inside and pulled out the same crumpled $5 bill, glowing faintly blue. Jake stared at it. Smiling through tears, he looked up at the brightening sky, where a faint streak of light crossed the clouds. "Take care, kid," he whispered. "You made me believe again." The wind blew softly. Carrying a faint, familiar laugh, Jake chuckled and stood, walking toward the rising sun behind him. The faint hum of the beacon echoed once more, fading into the morning. And though the world around him was ordinary again, Jake Miller knew his life would never be the same. Somewhere far beyond the stars, a little alien girl looked down at Earth. Her hand pressed against the glass of her ship, and she whispered into the stars, "I'll come back one day, Dad." The night was long and cold, and the fire inside the cave burned low. Ethan sat quietly beside the alien mother and her baby, watching the tiny creature sleep in its mother's arms. The air was heavy with silence, but it was not the same silence as before. It was softer now, filled with the sound of breathing and life. For the first time since his crash, Ethan felt that he was not alone. The alien mother looked at him with curious eyes, her face glowing faintly in the firelight. Her blue skin shimmered like water under moonlight. She didn't speak his language, but her eyes spoke enough. She was thankful. Afraid and tired all at once, Ethan smiled weakly, hoping she understood that he meant no harm. He tried to rest, but his stomach growled, reminding him that he had given away his last meal. He was hungry too, weaker with every hour still. When he looked at the baby's peaceful face, he knew he had made the right choice. That small life was worth more than his empty stomach. As dawn approached, a strange sound echoed from outside, a deep hum, almost like thunder. The alien mother stiffened. Holding her child close, Ethan stood up quickly. Scanning the sky through the cave's entrance, in the distance, he saw faint red lights moving above the desert. Machines, maybe drones, searching the land. He didn't know if they were human or alien, but he could tell they were dangerous. He motioned for her to stay quiet. Pressing a finger to his lips, she seemed to understand. Her breathing fast but silent. The machines passed without noticing the cave, their light sweeping across the sand and then fading away. Ethan sighed in relief and sat back down, but he could see the fear in the mother's face, the way her hands trembled as she held her baby. This planet was not safe, not anymore. He looked around the cave for anything useful. He found broken metal pieces, shattered crystal jars, and a strange device half buried under dust. It looked like it once stored energy, maybe food or medicine. He handed it to her, hoping she knew how to use it. She studied it for a moment, then pressed her hand against it. The crystal inside flickered weakly but then died out again. Her shoulders sank. It was useless. Ethan sighed and sat beside her. He wanted to help more, but he had nothing left to give. He reached into his pocket and found a small silver bar, a piece of emergency ration he had forgotten. Not much, but enough for one meal. He broke it in half and offered her one piece. She shook her head at first, pushing it back to him. He smiled and gently placed it in her hand again. He took a small bite from his half to show it was safe. After a moment, she tasted hers too. Her eyes widened. The taste was new, strange, but good. The baby woke up and reached for her hand, wanting a bite. The mother broke a small piece and gave it to her child. When the baby smiled, something inside Ethan's chest grew warm. He hadn't seen a smile like that since leaving Earth. The alien mother's lips trembled, and tears filled her eyes again. She touched her heart, then placed her hand on his shoulder. No words, but the meaning was clear, gratitude. Deep and real. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. Hours passed, and the morning sun rose over the red hills of Xylon. Light spilled into the cave, painting the walls with soft gold. Ethan noticed more carvings on the stones. Drawings of tall alien figures holding hands with smaller ones, surrounded by shining stars. It looked like a story, a memory of peace long ago. He pointed to the carvings and then to her, asking if they were her people. She nodded sadly. Her husband was gone. Her home destroyed, her people scattered. Only she and her baby were left behind. Ethan felt a deep ache in his chest. He understood loss, but not like this. He wanted to say something comforting, but all he could do was sit beside her in that quiet moment. He realized how small he was in this vast, broken universe, yet somehow this act of kindness, this shared food, made the darkness a little brighter. As the day went on, the alien mother began to hum softly. Her song was strange, filled with echoing tones and gentle rhythms. It made the air feel alive again. The baby clapped tiny hands. Laughing softly, Ethan smiled, listening, feeling the sound touch his heart. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the feeling. Hope. Even in this dying world, hope still lived. When night came again, they sat together under the starlight outside the cave. The alien mother pointed to the sky, tracing shapes with her finger. She showed him her home star, long destroyed in the war. Ethan looked at his own reflection in her eyes and whispered softly, "I'm sorry." She couldn't understand the words, but she understood the pain behind them. For a long time they sat together in silence. Different worlds, one small fire between them. And though they didn't speak the same language, they shared something far greater: the gift of food, the gift of mercy, and the beginning of trust. The red sun of Xylon rose slowly above the horizon, painting the desert with colors of fire and dust. Ethan stepped out of the cave, his boots sinking into the soft sand. The air was warm now, but still dry and sharp like broken glass. Behind him, the alien mother was softly singing to her baby, her voice echoing against the stone walls. That sound, gentle and strange, gave Ethan a reason to smile. Even in a world that had forgotten peace, he looked around the valley, searching for any sign of water or food. There were bones of strange creatures scattered near the old ruins. The buildings were made of smooth silver stone, melted and cracked from ancient fire. It looked like a whole city had been destroyed by war. Ethan wondered what kind of world this once was, full of life, love and families. Now it was nothing but silence and ghosts. When he returned to the cave, the alien mother was waiting. She held a small crystal in her hand, glowing weakly. She touched her heart and then pointed at the crystal. Ethan watched carefully as she placed it on the ground and drew shapes in the dust. Circles, stars, and tiny figures that looked like her people. Then she drew a giant circle around everything and crossed it with her finger. Her eyes filled with sadness. Ethan understood she was telling a story. Through her gestures, he began to piece it together. Once, her planet was green and full of light. There were farms, rivers, and tall shining towers that reached the sky. Her people lived in harmony with nature, using energy from the crystals that grew beneath the surface. But then, something changed. She drew small figures that looked like humans. Tall, round heads wearing helmets. Ethan froze when he saw that. The humans came here searching for resources. They took the crystals, mined the land, and broke the balance. War followed. He could see the pain in her eyes as she moved her hand across the symbols. Her people tried to fight back, but they were not built for war. The air turned black. The rivers dried and the crops died. The aliens began to starve. Ethan's throat felt dry. He realized the truth. His own people, his own race had caused this. The hunger, the loss, the death of her husband. It all began because of humans. He looked down, unable to meet her eyes. Guilt burned inside him like fire. He wanted to tell her he was sorry, but how could he explain with no words? How could she forgive what his kind had done? The alien mother noticed his silence. She touched his shoulder gently, her expression calm. She didn't know the full truth yet, but she could sense the pain in him. The baby reached out and grabbed Ethan's finger. Smiling for a moment, he felt the world slow down. Maybe the past could not be changed, but the future still had a chance. Suddenly, the crystal in her hand flickered again, brighter this time. It showed a faint hologram, an image of the alien's husband and others of her kind. They were loading ships, fleeing from the city. Then explosions filled the sky and the image faded. The mother's tears fell quietly. Ethan placed his hand on the ground beside her. Showing respect, he whispered, "I'm sorry," his voice shaking. She didn't understand the words, but she felt the sorrow in them as the sun moved higher. Ethan decided to explore deeper into the ruins. Maybe he could find more crystals or food, something to help. The mother nodded, giving him the weak crystal for light. He walked through the empty streets, hearing the crunch of sand beneath his boots. He saw carvings of alien families, hands held together under a shining star. Then marks of claws and fire burned across them, reminders of destruction. He felt like he was walking through the history of guilt itself. At the edge of the ruins, he found something, a broken metal sign with human letters on it. The letters were faded but still readable. It said Terran Mining Site 07. Ethan's heart sank. There was no doubt now. Humans had been here. They had built this. They had destroyed this. He sat in the sand. Feeling the weight of it all, he wanted to scream, but the desert was too empty to hear him. He looked at the sign one last time, then turned back toward the cave. As he walked, he could see the smoke of his crashed ship rising in the distance. He thought about the message beacon inside, still working, still sending signals. If another human ship came here, they would finish what they started. He couldn't let that happen. When he returned to the cave, the alien mother looked at him with a questioning gaze. He didn't tell her what he had found. Not yet. She deserved peace, not more fear. He handed her a few glowing rocks he had collected for warmth. She smiled gently. The baby clapped its hands, laughing. The sound of that laughter gave Ethan a small spark of hope again. That night, as they sat by the fire, he looked at the stars. He wondered how many other worlds humans had hurt without knowing. And for the first time, he made a silent promise to himself. If he ever left this planet, he would tell the truth. He would make sure no one forgot what humans had done here. Because the real monsters were not always the aliens. Sometimes they were the ones who looked back from the mirror. The days passed slowly on Xylon, each sunrise painting the sky in colors of fire and gold. Ethan and the alien mother had built a fragile peace between them. She no longer hid her baby when he moved closer, and sometimes she even smiled her name. He had learned from her gestures was Lura, and her child was called Mira. They could not speak the same words, but they spoke through kindness, through looks and actions. It was a strange friendship, born out of hunger and fear, yet stronger with every passing hour. Every morning, Ethan searched the ruins for anything useful. He collected broken wires, metal scraps, and bits of crystal that still glowed faintly. Lura would wait by the cave entrance, holding Mira close, her eyes scanning the horizon for danger. When Ethan returned, they would sit together near the small fire and share what little food they had. Sometimes it was a few drops of melted ice or a handful of strange alien roots he found under the sand. Other times it was nothing at all, but even in hunger, there was a quiet peace between them. One evening, Ethan showed her his small communicator. It was half broken, its signal weak, but it still played short messages from his ship's memory. He pressed a button and a hologram flickered to life. A recording of Earth. Green fields, blue oceans, people laughing. Lura gasped softly, her eyes wide with wonder. She reached out to touch the image, her glowing fingers passing through the light. Mira giggled, clapping her hands. Thinking it was real water, Ethan smiled, remembering home. But his heart also ached, because he knew Earth's greed had reached this far and destroyed her world. In return, Lura showed him something of her own. She took a crystal from around her neck and held it in both hands. It shimmered like a tiny star, and then it began to play a faint melody. The sound was soft, like wind moving through silver trees. It was the song of her people, a memory of her lost world. Ethan closed his eyes and listened, feeling the sadness in every note. When the song ended, Lura looked at him and smiled weakly. Their worlds were different, but their hearts were the same. One afternoon, while Ethan was fixing a small energy cell from his ship, Lura came closer. She pointed to the tool in his hand and then to a broken machine in the corner of the cave. It was round and covered in dust, maybe an old purifier or generator. Ethan nodded and began working on it. For hours he used wires, crystals, and pieces of metal to connect the parts. Lura watched carefully, handing him tools when he asked. When he finally switched it on, the machine hummed softly and released a puff of clean air. Mira laughed as the wind brushed her face. Lura's eyes filled with tears again, this time not of sadness, but of hope. That night they built a small fire outside the cave. The stars above were bright and endless. Lura traced patterns in the air, showing Ethan constellations that meant stories to her people. She pointed to one shaped like a bird and made flapping motions. Ethan laughed softly and pointed to the same stars, drawing lines with his finger to show what humans called Orion. Two different meanings for the same light. They both looked at the sky for a long time, and in that silence their connection grew deeper. But not everything was peace far away. Red lights moved across the night sky again. Machines from orbit scanning, searching. Ethan noticed them first and quickly signaled for silence. Lura hugged Mira tightly, fear flashing in her glowing eyes. They hid behind the rocks, watching the lights pass over the desert like ghostly eyes. Ethan knew these were not alien drones, they were human, the same kind that had destroyed this place. His heart grew heavy with fear. If they found the cave, they would kill Lura and her child without a second thought. When the sky grew dark again, Ethan turned to her, his voice quiet and firm. He touched his chest and pointed to the sky. Then to her and Mira. He was trying to say he would protect them. No matter what, Lura didn't fully understand. But when she saw his serious eyes, she nodded slowly. Her trust in him had grown like a small flame that refused to die. She reached out, touched his arm, and whispered her word for friend. Ethan smiled faintly, repeating it, though his accent was strange. For the first time, she laughed, and a gentle, musical sound that filled the cold air with warmth. As the wind blew across the desert, Ethan sat beside the fire. He watched Lura hum softly to Mira. Rocking her to sleep, he thought about Earth. about the humans who would come here again. But he also thought about this small family, the bond that had formed in the middle of nowhere. Maybe not all humans were destroyers, he thought. Maybe some could heal what was broken. And in that quiet night under the silver sky of Xylon, a new kind of hope began to bloom, not in machines or weapons, but in the simple connection between a man, a mother, and a child. The desert night was colder than usual, and the sky was darker than before. Ethan sat near the fire, his eyes fixed on the small communicator in his hand. It flickered weakly, the signal icon blinking red. For days he had kept it off, afraid that someone might hear the signal. But now, a new sound had started, a faint mechanical hum coming from far beyond the hills. He knew that sound too well. It was not the wind, not the alien machines. It was human technology. Ethan's heart began to race. If a rescue ship had found his distress signal, that meant humans were coming. At first, that thought gave him hope, but then he looked at Lura and Mira sleeping near the fire, their faces calm, their breathing soft, and that hope turned into fear. He remembered the mining sign he had found, the truth of what humans had done here if the soldiers came. They wouldn't see an innocent mother and child. They would see aliens, enemies, targets. He couldn't let that happen. As the sound grew louder, Lura woke up, her glowing eyes full of worry. She could sense something was wrong. Ethan stood and pointed toward the hills, then touched his communicator. She tilted her head, confused. He didn't know how to explain, so he showed her, pressing the device until a small hologram appeared, a symbol of the Earth Alliance, the same mark that had burned her cities years ago. When she saw it, her expression changed from confusion to fear. She stepped back, holding Mira close to her chest. Ethan froze, realizing his mistake. He tried to speak, shaking his head, holding his hands up to show peace, but the damage was done. Lura looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. Her voice was trembling as she spoke in her alien tongue. He couldn't understand the words, but he understood the emotion. Betrayal. Her tears glowed under the firelight. Falling like tiny stars, Mira started crying too. Sensing her mother's fear, Ethan's chest tightened. He had wanted to save them, not scare them. He took a slow step forward. "Please," he said softly. "I'm not like them." She didn't understand the words, but she understood his tone. Still, she shook her head. Whispering something over and over, she pointed at the sky, then at his chest where the human symbol glowed faintly on his suit. She was asking if he was one of them. The destroyers. He couldn't lie. His silence was enough. Her face broke. A quiet sob escaped her lips. Ethan turned away, pain cutting deep inside. He wanted to throw the communicator into the fire, to erase everything human from this planet. But the signal was already sent somewhere above. A human ship had received his location. He had brought danger to the very ones he wanted to protect. The next morning he woke to find the cave empty. Lura and Mira were gone. His chest went cold. He rushed outside, scanning the horizon. Their footprints led toward the old ruins. Fading quickly in the rising sandstorm, he followed them, calling her name even though she couldn't understand. The wind carried his voice away. He climbed over rocks and broken walls until he saw them. Lura holding Mira, standing near a collapsed tower. Her face was pale, her movements weak. When she saw him, she didn't run, but her eyes were full of tears again. He stopped a few steps away. Breathing hard, he pointed to the sky, then placed his hand on his heart. He was trying to tell her that danger was coming, not from him, but from above. She watched him carefully, her expression softening just a little. Then a sound filled the air, a deep metallic roar. Ethan looked up and saw a shadow moving across the sky. A large human ship descending, its engines glowing red. Dust and wind exploded around them. He grabbed Lura's hand, pulling her toward the rocks for cover. She hesitated, then followed, clutching Mira tightly. They hid behind a half-buried wall as the ship landed near the crash site. Soldiers in white suits stepped out, weapons glowing blue. Ethan recognized the emblem on their armor. Earth Recon Unit. His people, but not his allies. He could hear them scanning the area, their voices sharp through the static of their radios. "Locate the life forms," one said. "Signal shows multiple readings," another replied. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. If they found the cave, they would find Lura and Mira. He turned to her and pointed down a narrow path leading into the rocks. She looked at him, still unsure. He touched her hand gently, whispering, Trust me." Something in his voice made her hesitate, then slowly she nodded. Together, they crawled through the sand, keeping low. The sound of human boots echoed closer. Ethan clenched his fists, knowing he had to make a choice. He could hide and survive, or he could protect them and risk everything. When the first beam of light swept past their hiding place, Ethan knew his decision. He turned back toward the soldiers, drawing their attention away from Laura and Mira. The soldiers shouted, their weapons humming. Ethan ran into the open desert, shouting, waving his arms. Their scanners locked onto him instantly. He saw the bright blue glow of a weapon charging, and just before the first shot was fired, he whispered one last word to the wind. "Run!" The wind screamed across the desert as the human soldiers opened fire. Blue energy bolts tore through the air, hitting the rocks around Ethan. Sand exploded in bright flashes. Lighting up the dark horizon, he ran as fast as he could, feeling the heat from every blast behind him. The sound of metal feet followed, steady and cold. They were machines and men working together. Hunting without mercy, Ethan's lungs burned. His legs felt heavy, but he didn't stop. He wanted the soldiers to follow him, far away from the cave, far away from Laura and Mira. He glanced back once and saw the light from their hiding place fading behind the rocks. Good, he thought. They were safe for now. He stumbled over a broken piece of alien metal. Falling hard into the sand, pain shot through his shoulder, but he forced himself up again. He could hear the soldiers' voices growing closer. "Target located," one shouted. "Human survivor identified." They didn't know about the aliens yet, and he had to keep it that way. Ethan turned sharply. Running toward the old ruins, he remembered the tunnels beneath them. Deep, dark, maybe a way to escape. The soldiers followed, their boots crushing bones and sand. He ducked behind a fallen pillar and activated the last flare in his pack. The red light burned bright, casting long shadows across the stone walls. For a moment, the soldiers hesitated, their sensors confused by the heat signal. Ethan used that moment to disappear into the tunnels. The air inside was thick and cold. He could hear his own heartbeat echoing in the darkness. He leaned against a wall, breathing hard. His arm was bleeding, his suit torn. He pressed his hand against the wound, trying to stop the flow. Outside, he could still hear the soldiers calling his name. "Ethan Ward, respond," their voices said through static. "We detected your distress signal. We are here to retrieve you." "Retrieve him?" "Yes, but what about Laura and her baby?" "They would call them contamination. They would destroy them." He closed his eyes, the memory of their faces flashing before him. Mira's soft laugh, Laura's glowing eyes full of trust. He couldn't let that be taken away. He had to protect them, even if it meant betraying his own kind. Then a sound came from deeper in the tunnel. Soft footsteps, slow and careful. Ethan grabbed a metal rod, ready to fight. But when the light from his flare touched the figure, he froze. It was Laura, holding Mira close to her chest, her eyes wide with worry, her skin glowing faintly in the dark. She had followed him. He shook his head quickly, waving his hands for her to go back. But she refused, stepping closer. She touched his wound gently, and her hand began to glow brighter. He felt warmth spreading through his arm, the pain slowly fading. Her power was weak but pure. Like light in the middle of darkness, Ethan looked at her in disbelief. She smiled softly, even as tears filled her eyes. She whispered something, a word that sounded like stay. He wanted to tell her to run, but before he could, a loud crash shook the tunnel. The soldiers had found them. The walls trembled as laser fire filled the air. Ethan pushed Laura behind a rock, covering her and the baby with his body. Chunks of stone fell around them, the light from the soldiers' visors growing brighter. He grabbed a fallen blaster from the ground. It was half broken, but it worked. He took aim and fired, the recoil almost knocking him down. The shot hit one of the soldiers, sending sparks flying. More of them came forward, their weapons glowing blue. Ethan fought with everything he had. Every shot was a promise to protect what was left of innocence. The sound of battle filled the tunnels, echoes mixing with the baby's cries. Laura held Mira tight, whispering something in her language, maybe a prayer. A blast hit near Ethan, throwing him against the wall. His vision blurred. Dust and light filled his eyes. He could hear the soldiers moving closer, their voices sharp and cold. "Target injured. Secure the area." He forced himself up, one arm shaking, his breath ragged. He saw Laura's face through the smoke, her eyes full of fear and love. He smiled faintly and whispered, "Run." Again she hesitated, then nodded. Holding Mira close, she slipped through a crack in the tunnel wall. Disappearing into the shadows, Ethan turned back to face the soldiers. He fired until the blaster overheated, the light burning in his hands, then silence. He dropped the weapon, falling to his knees. The soldiers surrounded him, their armor shining under the red light. One stepped forward, raising his weapon. Ethan looked up at him, his voice weak but steady. "There's nothing left for you here," he said. "Go home." The soldier paused, confused by his words, and in that pause, Laura and Mira escaped into the endless desert night. When the soldiers finally dragged Ethan out of the tunnel, the wind had already erased their footprints. He looked up at the stars, barely conscious. He didn't know if he would live, but he knew one thing. Laura and Mira were free, and for him that was enough. The morning on Xylon was quiet again. Ash and dust floated in the pale air, moving like gray snow under the light of two suns. Ethan lay on the ground near the broken tunnel, his body weak, his uniform torn. The battle was over, but the silence that followed felt heavier than the gunfire. Smoke rose from the ruins and the sound of engines faded as the soldiers left. They had taken what they came for, a wounded man, a broken signal, and the belief that nothing else had survived. But they were wrong far away. Beyond the line of the dunes, Laura carried Mira in her arms. Her steps were slow but steady, her eyes scanning the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly before her, and yet she kept walking, because in her heart she believed that the human who saved her might still be alive. Hours passed before she saw movement in the distance, a small figure crawling through the sand. Leaving faint trails behind, she ran toward him, calling softly in her language, her voice trembling with hope. Ethan looked up, his eyes half open. When he saw her, he smiled weakly. He was alive. Barely but alive. Laura dropped to her knees beside him. Her glowing hands touched his face gently. She began to hum the same melody she had sung to Mira during the nights in the cave. Ethan closed his eyes, listening, his breathing shallow but calm. The sound filled the air with warmth, even as the wind whispered cold across the dunes. Mira reached out a tiny hand, touching his arm. Her skin shimmered like starlight, and Ethan felt something deep in his chest. A quiet peace. He tried to speak, his voice faint. "You're safe," he whispered. "That's all that matters." She couldn't understand his words, but she understood his heart. Tears filled her eyes again, falling onto the sand like drops of light. She pressed her forehead to his, whispering softly in her tongue. It was a prayer, a promise, a goodbye. The sun climbed higher, its heat burning across the land. Ethan knew he didn't have much time. His body was too weak, his oxygen nearly gone, but his spirit felt lighter than it ever had. He looked at Laura and Mira, the two lives he had saved, and for the first time in a long while, he felt proud to be human. Laura took out the crystal pendant she always wore. It glowed faintly, still holding the memory of her lost world. She placed it in his hand, closing his fingers around it. Her eyes met his, full of emotion. He shook his head slowly, trying to give it back, but she pressed his hand tighter, shaking her head in return. She wanted him to keep it, a piece of her people, a symbol of their bond. The wind grew stronger. Carrying sand across their faces, Mira began to cry softly. Sensing the sadness in the air, Ethan smiled weakly, reaching up to touch her tiny hand. "Don't cry, little one," he whispered. "You're going to live," he coughed, his voice fading like a dying flame. Laura held his hand, her tears glowing brighter now. She didn't want to lose him, not after all they had survived. The sky darkened as a storm rolled in from the horizon. Lightning flashed, thunder echoed across the valley. Ethan's breathing slowed, his eyes half closed. Laura leaned close. Her voice soft and shaking, she said his name for the first time. "Ethan." He opened his eyes in surprise. Hearing his name in her voice felt like a miracle. He smiled one last time, whispering a single word. "Friend?" Then the light in his eyes dimmed, and the desert fell silent once more. Laura sat beside him for a long time. Holding his hand, the storm raged around her, but she didn't move when the winds finally calmed. She looked up at the sky. The twin suns had broken through the clouds again. She whispered something in her language, a farewell to the stars. Then she stood, holding Mira close, and walked toward the horizon, each step light, each tear glowing like silver under the morning light. Many years later, travelers who came to Xylon would find a small stone marked with strange carvings. 2 stars, one large and one small, connected by a single line, and below them, the symbol of the Earth Alliance, scratched out and replaced with the word peace. No one knew who made it, but legend said that somewhere beyond the stars, an alien child grew up telling a story about a human, a man who gave away his last meal, who fought against his own kind, and who proved that even among the stars, a heart filled with kindness could change everything.